Friends, so today we'll talk a little bit about the Asian macro, then about China as a benchmark, because often people ask, will India be next China? And then try to demystify India, which is almost impossible. In fact, there is a magic in India staying as a mystery, and maybe there is some good answers for the world in that mystery as such. So let me first clarify, all of us who look at the data of the last 40 years of development of Asia, often ignore one major issue in all of the data. In the 80s and 90s, most of the data presented as Japan and Asia ex-Japan. In the last 20 years, it's China and Asia ex-China. And often Middle East is combined with EMEA. A lot of us do not realize that Middle East as a name was a mistake made by an American in 1854. We all carried. It's neither in the East nor in the middle of that East. It is West Asia. And if you combine that figure, today Asia is the largest factory of the world and also largest market of the world. So just look at some of these figures. For garments, 77% of the world production is in Asia. Watches, full watches or the components, 82% of them are made in Asia, and accessories, 83%. And not only Asia has become the factory of the world, when you talk about the consumption as well, Asia now is the largest market of the world, and across all these categories, more than 50%. One big question, however, is that is the factory of the world. It is also the largest market in the world. How come its share of value in these categories is so low? Only 21% in garments, 7% in watches, and 17% of value. Because that value resides in brands. And where do these brands live? The brands are today for these categories are still in Europe and USA for the first category, a little bit of Japan, but otherwise Switzerland and USA for watches, and fashion accessories still there. And we Asians work very hard. We open our stores from early morning to late evening, 363 days of the year. We close either for Diwali or Chinese New Year 2 days only. We take much less holidays, work much longer hours, while Europeans enjoy 45 days of holidays. I can tell you that Europe is on notice. Within a decade, this would change. This would change because we Asians are now starting to learn how to build brands as well. Now, of course, we don't still have experts like Bob Shard from Fresh Britain, but again, we're trying to adopt some of those. But it is already happening. If you have not noticed, some of the categories, like airlines, the top 3 airlines in the world are Singapore Airlines, Emirates, and Qatar, all 3 Asian. Top hotels in the world, look at Mandarin Oriental, Six Senses, Rosewood, Aman, all born in Asia. And we are creating a new brand called Jaya now, which will be a combination of Aman with culture of Soho House. All this innovation is coming from Asia. So if it has happened in those 2 great categories, it will happen in this as well. So Europe has to watch out. Now, talking about the story about India and China, India-China story basically started because of a very serendipitous moment that happened exactly 46 years ago on this very day, 13th November of 1978. Deng Xiaoping was invited by France as a state guest. And China didn't even have a plane that could go directly to Paris. It had to refuel. On the way to France, it refueled in Bangladesh. On the way back, it refueled in Singapore. And he met Lee Kuan Yew. On that day of 13 November, he asked Lee Kuan Yew, how did you guys develop this country into such an incredibly developed place? And he told him we did only one thing. We opened up the country to the world. We invited the world to come and trade here. You guys in Beijing are much more intelligent, big mandarins and titans. If you open up, you could win the world too. He literally, from that 30 November meeting, took a holiday in Lijiang, wrote this famous paper and presented next month in the 11th plenary session of the Congress, National Congress. And that paper was called Reform and Opening Up. And that influence of Lee Kuan Yew led to China opening up in 1979. 1980 was actually the first year a first private enterprise license was given in China to a woman who was making buttons called Chang Huamei, and then started the whole enterprise. And look at in 80s and 90s, 20 years, it goes on to become a factory of the world. First started in the Pearl River Delta, those 3 states, and eventually across all of China. Now, of course, these 2 nations have almost same population. India is now across China and growing faster. But when it comes to luxury market, talk of any brand, be it Mercedes-Benz or BMW, or talk of Louis Vuitton or Cartier or Patek or whatever, India is less than 1%. China is about 40%. How did this happen? Could this happen in India going forward as well? That's the big question. But if you look at China, in 1990, China was where India is today, about 1% of the market. It's exactly similar. There were about 5 malls in China, and the rest of the brand had to go to 5-star hotels to open stores. That's how first big Vuitton store was in China World Hotel. India is exactly about that. In the 10 years, it didn't develop much. In 2000, China's economy was still smaller than New York City's economy. New York City economy was 2.7 trillion, China was still 2.3 trillion. The real takeoff happened in 2002 when China joined WTO. And as the Americans call, things went off the charts, be it in consumption or exports, all of that. And by 2010, it was clear China was the next big thing. And then came the largest economic expansion ever in the history of this planet in that decade of 10 to 20, and 10% become 33%. If you go to World Bank in Washington, D.C., they have the motto to get the world rid of poverty. Entire World Bank effort across the world from 1950 brought only 380 million people out of poverty. China alone, credit to them, took out more than double of that out of poverty in that period. It's the largest economic expansion ever in the history of the planet. And that leads to this. So it's almost always linked to the basic economy. Yes, number of people, same. But if you look at people who earn more than $12 a day, who you can call broadly as consumers, the number in China is exactly similar to the number of people who are not consumers, who are poor and vulnerable, earning less than $12 a day. So that's the thing. The starting point is very, very similar to their 1990. Now, if you look at this other data, per capita income, 2,700 to 13,000, about 4.8x, let's say 5x. If you look at upper middle class looks big, but when it comes to upper middle class, it's only 30 to 35 million, which is like a Germany middle class, whereas China is 120 to 150. That's another about 4 to 4.2x. So if you take 5x and 4x, that's your 20x multiple right there. But where is the other 2x multiple? The other 2x multiple lies in the fact that, like Japan or Korea, China also adopted a lot of Western culture. The men would wear suits with tie, like in Japan or Korea, whereas in India, it's still very, very Indian. And that's one of the major things about India. India, across the segment, be it for men or women, is very Indian and will remain so for a long period of time. And there is a lesson in that. This is another aspect. We were just talking earlier about China starting to get old, and India is still a very young country. But there are 2 lessons here. China's demographic dividend, which I define as the year when number of people working became more than number of people dependent. In China, that started in 1998. 98 was the first year, after 250 years, there were more people working than dependent in China. Unfortunately, that lasted only till 2018 because of single-child policy. Once again, the number of dependent are more than number of people working. So they lost that. India, in fact, the demographic dividend, exactly of the same figure, started in 2018, same year when China ends that demographic, is likely to stay for 41 years. Now, India, therefore, has great raw material of youth that is now getting into workforce, and provided India can really employ them well. That is India's challenge. India is today, has very large number of people unemployed or partially employed. On the other hand, the other lesson here is China getting old, not necessarily bad, as you saw in the previous presentation. The older generation having less money to spend on kids, having less money to spend on new homes for new kids, could spend much more on themselves. Not only that, China's real problem today is not consumption. China's bigger problem today is the property market. Ever since China became, from 1980 onwards, the home ownership was it didn't exist in the country. 73% of the household investment, 73% went into property in the last 40 years. This is the highest in the history of the humankind anywhere in the world. And that market overbuilt, and today you have an issue that 33% of the economy, which is property market, is moribund. 7 of the top 10 property makers are likely to go bankrupt. And Chinese government had decided not to bail them out, will let the pain be absorbed by the economy. So yes, it will be 2 or 3 years, or probably 4 years of pain that China will have to go through. The second issue is China is facing geopolitical challenges across the West, particularly Trump's election clearly signifies that there'll be bigger challenges for China. So therefore, anybody who's involved in export-led economy is likely to face headwinds going forward. But yet China is growing. How is China growing? By the China was smaller than New York economy in 2000, but now it's $18.3 trillion economy and is growing at a slow rate, 4%, but still that is higher than rest of Asia's growth overall. So what is growing in China still is a consumption. People are richer, people are consuming better. Yes, it has stalled for the time being and it's less consumption in luxury because you need good mood, which doesn't exist today. I think 2-3 years from now, China will go through this cycle and come back better. So do not count the dragon out. Dragon will remain important, and therefore in all your strategies, do not start taking that out. India, now all of you saw a few months ago the big Ambani wedding. That Ambani wedding did a big service to India, but also a disservice. Big service, I put India on the map, put Indian luxury on a show. Yeah, from Kim Kardashian to Mark Zuckerberg, all adorned in Indian attire, showing up there was great. The disservice was the aspect that they live in a 2 billion home, 4 people living in 400,000 square feet of space, right next to the most densely populated, largest slum in the world. I hope Mr. Ambani will take on the mantle of another gentleman who lived in the same city in 3-bedroom apartment, Mr. Ratan Tata. He managed the equally large empire, and he gave away in his lifetime $102 billion to charity, more than Bill Gates and Warren Buffett together. I really hope he takes on that mantle going forward, because India needs that service. Another aspect, now beside India being different, within India, India is very different. And here I'm just describing 4 major arenas of India, but within each of those it's also very different. So north of India is all about pomp and show, living for the day, overspend. Because India was attacked 64 times, of which 38 times the conqueror was successful in capturing some part of India or entire India as such. So these people are always facing wars. Who knows about tomorrow, live for the day today. So the south, on the other hand, was very protected. And people in the south live very different life, but they live very, very subtle luxury. Western people are perhaps the most connected to the Western world. So today, if you are in Mumbai saying that I bought this particular bag in Palladium Mall or in Taj Hotel, it's really losing the magic. You want to say that I was in Harrods with so-and-so, or I was in Rue Saint-Honoré and I bought it there. That's what they want to do. So East, on the other hand, is the true intellectual capital of the country. Almost all major philosophers, all major scientists, mathematicians, musicians came from there. Those guys do not want to indulge in so-called luxury. If you want to sell a piano or send a violin, yeah, you go to Calcutta. These guys are intellectual to a fault, so much so that they elected a communist party to govern them for 7 times in a row in a multi-party system that was the continuously longest-serving communist government in the world. Intellectual to a fault, but true genius capital of the country even today. The other issue in India is, as in many economies, Africa and Asia, the parallel economy is very large. A very large part of that parallel economy goes into one asset class, that is land or buying apartments. Because India has severe rules to send money abroad, but for a few thousand people, they don't have Swiss accounts or Singapore accounts, and they typically put that corrupt money into land. As a result, land is very expensive. Well, land is so expensive that to build a mall and make it profitable is very, very difficult. As a result, there are only 5 malls. Unless, like in China, if government subsidizes or give free land to build malls, it's likely to remain the biggest constraint. The other issue, some of you who have dealt with India realize India also has the big issue of incredibly complex customs, very high duties, and also very, very difficult process. India's got its act put together to really open up on infrastructure and also open up its regime. The other question is not only for general fashion, but is India ready for luxury? Once Bernard Arnault told me that you cracked China, but being Indian, how come you didn't ever crack your own market? And I told him that LVMH is not luxury enough for India. And he said, yeah, right. And I said, no, Mr. Arnault, I'm actually serious. And then he says, why do you say so? There was a time when India is a great market for luxury. There was a time when Louis Vuitton sold almost quarter of his sale to India. Cartier sold about 1/3 of his sale to India. But if you go to Cartier headquarters, there's Maharaja of Patiala's picture on the screen with a tutti frutti necklace. It was Indianized jewelry. Maharaja of Kapurthala was the largest collector of Louis Vuitton trunks. Almost every trunk was made for some particular Indian practice. And that Indianization was very, very important piece of that. Even from UK, Rolls-Royce sold the largest number. First air-conditioned car, first Phantom were all delivered to India. And those were all Indianized in their look. When Birmingham was the biggest center for luxury, a lot of people would not believe that England was ever a center of, it was. And there was a company, Baccarat equivalent of the time called Osler, for making crystal chandeliers, and all Nawab of Hyderabad and Maharaja of Udaipur, they will send something made in wood to Birmingham from India, so they could copy the same design in crystal and sand. So that has always been a big element. Indian luxury will always remain very Indian. Unless you Indianize, unlikely to crack that market. And you saw in Ambani wedding that aspect. So across the spectrum, be it youth, and you see that not just in Bollywood, every aspect of Indian life. And that is why if Kim Kardashian wore a Western dress, would have looked like a sore thumb. Same for Mark Zuckerberg. So that is India for you. The other aspect of India, I would say, as McKinsey report clearly said, that India, given it has got large youth population, now they're getting into workforce a large way, and they're becoming a big consumer. But bulk of that is value for money consumer. So if you are a value for money player, you certainly, via Zara or Nike or H&M, that's a big market for you. Of course, the constraint of mall still remains. If that can get cracked, that's a big play. The other part is Western luxury, particularly accessories, can still do. So we might make a great costume, but don't make good shoes, so you then buy Baluti to go with Indian. And the same thing is true for women with their bags and all. But when it comes to jewelry or garments, it's very, very difficult for Western brand unless they invent. Hermes made a sari collection. Dior made a sari collection. It was sold within a week. And I wonder why they didn't do another collection after that, because that was more done for the launch, but not followed up on that one. They cleared the lesson. Customized to Indian way of life. So it's not only basically the look. India, you take Dior home. Maybe there are 5,000 Indians who can fit into that. Ergonomics of our bodies are very different. There is only one company that has done the study very well, which is Marks & Spencer. Marks & Spencer has M&S standards. They're the only ones who study the ergonomics of bodies across Asia, not just India. So those who are into manufacturing try to adopt those standards. They have the best information. And finally, manufacturing locally. There are brands like US Polo Association at, again, value for money level, or a better value like La Martina, which is a phenomenal brand for Argentina. They are now making it in India, and India is now the fastest growing market for them. So many of these elements you have to keep in your strategy to do that. And again, other aspect of value for money is often, like in China, by the way, 1990 onwards, for Dior, beauty was the first segment to enter with, where you could indulge in luxury at a very low price point. And that's how India could also be started in those segments first. Beauty, accessories, and onwards. So overall, India has got its act together to put going forward, but brands also have got their whole agenda in front of them, what to do. One, to Indianize. Second, to customize. Both are essential, otherwise not likely to win in India. Second part, for example, if you are Omega watches, you will sell more Constellation, which you can see from a distance to north, but you'll sell DeVille to the guy in south. If you're Patek Philippe, you sell Nautilus to the guy in north, and you'll sell simple strap watches in the south. And again, as I mentioned, if you're Stanway & Sons, you would go nowhere but go to Calcutta. So in this, adaptation is very, very important as well, part of India. And India, again, as you said earlier, stupendous growth. It's right in front of us, but bulk of that growth is led by very young population, yet with a very low per capita income, and therefore bulk of the play is an aspirational. So if you are in aspirational play, go to India today, this will be your biggest play going forward. In luxury, you still have to work. So Slumdog could become very much a millionaire, and all of you could have a great play in it. But there is one last thing I will leave with. India has to make sure particularly Mr. Modi has to make sure they do not make the geopolitical darling into a pariah if they make the democracy into illiberal democracy. As Tina Brown yesterday said, India is going in the wrong direction on that front. You may lose that status. The second message to all of us, while we are trying to make India adapt the West, I think there is a message for the West to adopt from India. Two most famous Indians ever have still very relevant lesson for us today. Buddha, who said, all your unhappiness comes from your desires. Less desires, more happiness. And second, Gandhi. He gave up his Savile Row wardrobe and Northampton shoes. When he died, he had one attaché case with 3 dhotis made with self-spun cotton dhotis, 2 pair of shoes, 1 pair of eyeglasses. But he still made it to Time magazine's cover as Man of the Century. So we can adopt a little bit more of Gandhian, simple living, high thinking. Thank you.